All right, it's day 12 in Ottawa's protest blockade, and similar protests are also causing disruption elsewhere. In Coutts, Alberta, as you just heard, where a border crossing reopened today after being blockaded again last night. And Canada's busiest border crossing, land border crossing in Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge, that was temporarily closed today, and now traffic is barely moving across it. The federal government says it's working with all levels of government to end the demonstration. So what's on the table? Omar Alghabra is Minister of Transport. He's back again with us, this time from the foyer in the House of Commons. Minister, always good to speak with you.
Hi, David. Good to be back.
Your colleague, Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair, said this morning that you and your department are in touch with provincial counterparts about possibly imposing provincial regulations on these blockades in an effort to end them. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, David, I've reached out to my colleague, Minister Maroney, the Ontario Minister of Transportation, where we're proposing, there's on the books, on the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, there's the powers invested in the province to fine drivers who are impeding traffic. So there's, and these type of infractions can carry serious financial consequences to drivers who are using commercial vehicles for unlawful activities. So I've reached out to her and I've expressed my advice to her. I know she's looking at it, but this is a law enforcement matter and the law needs to be enforced. So our supply chains are at risk, our food supplies are at risk. I've spoken with the automotive parts manufacturers who say if this can go on further, jobs at risk because some shifts from automakers can be shut down. So this will carry serious consequences.
Yeah, I want to just deal with that in a second, but first just talk a little bit more about the enforcement, because as I understand it, the provincial governments you're dealing with, they could do things like suspend or strip commercial licenses and go after the insurance for these vehicles because they're insured as commercial vehicles, not as blockades in a capital city or a cross-border bridge. Have you gotten any indication from the provincial governments if they're willing to go that far?
Well, our government was the one who proposed this to the Ontario government. My understanding is that they're looking at it, but you're right. The Ontario government has the power to enact such measures.
Okay, but they've told you they're looking at it. Have you got a sense of if we might see that, or is it a low priority option for them?
I think it's a question that should be posed to the Ontario government. I'm sure they're taking it very seriously.
No, that is a very fair point. We've asked them to come on, but I figured if you knew, you'd be able to tell us. All right, I want to talk to you a little bit about the impact of the border. We have the two blockades going on intermittently in Windsor and in Coutts, Alberta. I mean, you mentioned the supply chain impact there. I know the auto sector in particular is worried about the Windsor blockade. Have you got a sense of the dollar amount, the economic impact of this and what it is having so far?
It's going to have a massive impact, David. I've spoken, as I said, with representatives from the automotive parts manufacturers. I've spoken with representatives of the food manufacturing industry. I've spoken with representatives from the retail industries that represent grocers, and they're all concerned. They're all concerned because much of their products and produce comes through these ports of entry, and they work on just-in-time delivery, whether it's an automotive manufacturer that expects the products to arrive on time, and if it's not, then they have to lay off people who are supposed to assemble these products, or if it's produce that it's expected to arrive freshly, and if it's not there in time, then those products will not be on the shelf and it could go to waste.
Yeah, and we're kind of getting a crash course in jurisdiction and civics this week because this is a cross-border bridge which would fall under your jurisdiction as a federal government, but the protest is happening just off the bridge. The blockade is, which puts it in municipal and provincial jurisdiction. So I know you say it's a policing issue, but is there any sort of federal might you can bring to bear here because it is impacting an official important border crossing?
David, you're right. And we're willing to offer, we extended our assistance to the provincial government and the municipal governments that are impacted. So we're there. We're ready to assist in whatever they're asking for. So it is an enforcement. It's a law enforcement matter, and the law needs to be enforced. And like you said, it falls within the provincial or municipal jurisdiction.
You know, a lot of these protests, or most of these protests, say they're doing it to protest largely federal vaccine policy and mandates. And you've been criticized, your government has, by the opposition conservatives for being politicizing this and being divisive. Well, today, your colleague, Joel Lightbound, Quebec City MP, who's in your caucus, he said pretty much the same thing. I mean, what's your reaction to the criticism coming from inside your own caucus?
David, I will disagree with you. I don't think Joel said exactly the same thing that the protesters are saying. The protesters are against all mandates, not just border vaccine mandate. They're against all public health measures. And Joel is someone, he's a friend, I respect him and I like him. And I think I agree with much of what he said. I disagree with some of his conclusions. It's regrettable that vaccines today are politicized. I disagree that it is our government who is politicizing it. And to prove that point, there are provinces that have conservative governments who are mandating vaccines. There are private businesses who are not regulated by any government that still are mandating vaccines for their employees. The science tells us that vaccines save lives. So we are doing whatever we can. It's a solemn commitment that we have for Canadians to do whatever we can to protect their health and safety. But I do acknowledge that, unfortunately, these vaccine mandates have been politicized, and it's getting really frustrating for Canadians.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I wasn't trying to suggest Mr. Lightbound was saying the same thing as the protesters, just that his criticism of the way the government has used vaccines was similar to what the opposition conservatives have said. I wasn't trying to put him in with the protesters, but just to be fair to everybody on that. But just to pick up on that, Minister, one of the things Mr. Lightbound said today is that there's other people in the Liberal caucus who agree with him and share a lot of this discomfort. Are you worried now that your party and your government's solidarity on this issue, when protesters are parked everywhere and around here and at border crossings, that you might start seeing some cracks in the Liberal caucus unity and some voices coming out publicly against this very important policy for your government?
It's let's be very clear, David. Joel still is a Liberal, wants to be a Liberal member of caucus, and still has confidence in our government to do the right thing for Canadians. I understand that there are almost all Canadians are frustrated by the situations and the situation that we're going through. And there are ongoing debates. Which public health measures should be adjusted? Why are we doing this? Why are we not doing that? That is a healthy, natural aspect of what we're going through. It's very difficult, it's very challenging, and some of us, I know people look to government to provide solid answers about everything, and some of these answers are not readily available because Omicron and COVID-19 pandemic, once in a 100-year event, it keeps changing, we keep learning about it, but what our commitment to Canadians, to reassure them that we will be there by them. We will do whatever it takes to protect their health and safety. We will always follow the science, even though sometimes the science and information change, so we will adjust. And we are having conversations today about adjusting our public health measures, just like some other provinces are. And you know, just 2 months ago, David, you were asking government officials, why aren't you putting more public health measures because of the hospitalization rate? Now we're having a different conversation, which I think, again, it's a symptom of the pandemic that we're going through.
Just one last question, because I know you have to run to a meeting, Minister, but like science is one thing, rhetoric is another. And you can see on the signs and the T-shirts and the flags of the protesters that some of the things the Prime Minister has said is fueling their rage, fringe minority and extremist commentary. Is it time, everyone talks about lowering the temperature, is it time for that to start at the top maybe and dial it down a little bit in terms of what the Prime Minister says about the people outside?
I'm sure, David, you saw the Prime Minister's speech yesterday in the House of Commons. We will never give up on Canadians. We are going to always be compassionate with Canadians. Some of the protesters are twisting the words of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was calling people who are radical, who are throwing stones, who are threatening and intimidating our public health workers. Those are the fringe minority. People who are questioning public health measures, people who are frustrated, those are normal questions to be asked, and we need to, as a government, be confident in answering these questions, even the questions that we may not know the answers to. We need to tell people, look, hang in there. We need to do whatever science tells us, whatever data tells us, and yes, things will continue to change, but rest assured the government will be there along the way.
Okay, Minister Alghabra, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.